You might have seen the clip by now where Mr. Beast, the biggest YouTuber in the world, was asked about his visit to Antarctica and whether he believed in the ice wall. Instead of laughing it off or giving a clear answer, he hesitated and said this.
Do you believe in the ice wall?
Well, I can't say on stream. Let's just say you always need someone with you when you're in Antarctica.
Are you serious?
Within hours, this sparked a debate all over the internet. Many say he was clearly joking, while others believe that jokes like that don't come from nowhere. Suddenly, a place most people never think about was in the spotlight. Antarctica, the most isolated and restricted continent on Earth. A quick Google search shows that there really are some secrets about this continent, such as blocked satellites and blurred stitched together or oddly incomplete Google Earth imagery. So what makes this one continent feel different, and why is it treated differently than anywhere else on Earth? That's where the ice wall idea starts to grow. Not as a cartoon wall around the planet, but as the idea that Antarctica might be more than just frozen land, that it could be a barrier, a boundary, or something meant to keep people from going farther. Some believe Antarctica hides ancient technology, underground cities, or even advanced civilizations that live beyond the walls. Could this icy frontier actually be the edge of our known world? What is really hidden behind the ice? Here's the thing, the ice wall idea isn't completely imaginary, because if you approach Antarctica from the ocean, you really can run into towering ice cliffs and massive floating ice shelves that look like a frozen fortress from a distance. The coastline can absolutely look like a wall, especially in places like the Ross Ice Shelf, where the face of the ice rises like a white cliff with sections running over 370 miles long and standing roughly 50 to 160 feet above the waterline. Beneath that surface, the ice is hundreds of meters thick, mostly submerged, and part of a continent-wide ice sheet that averages over 1 mile thick. It immediately feels like a boundary, as if nature itself drew a line and said, "This is as far as you go." Antarctica makes that feeling even stronger, because it isn't just huge. It's huge in a way our brains struggle to understand. The kind of scale where you can look at a map and still not really grasp how far it is from anything familiar. The continent is larger than the United States and Mexico combined. It holds most of the planet's freshwater ice, and the cold can be so extreme that small mistakes turn deadly very quickly, like the environment simply doesn't care. The cold, the storms, the distance, the emptiness, and the sheer difficulty of operating there all work together as a natural barrier that makes the whole place feel like it was never meant for people. Now let's look into the screenshots that show up again and again on conspiracy theory forums. There are many satellite images with odd pixelation, smeared patches that look lower resolution than the areas around them, and strange blank strips where the imagery suddenly shifts, almost like a seam in a stitched-together map. Every time a new image gets into the public eyes, people ask why the image is blurred and what someone might be trying to hide. What makes this so effective is that you don't have to trust anyone telling the story, because you can open up Google Earth and start hunting for strange tiles yourself, like it's an Easter egg hunt. And when you find something that looks off, your brain does what it always does when it runs into uncertainty. It fills in the gap with an explanation that feels satisfying. The most boring explanation is also the most realistic, which is that Antarctica is genuinely hard to image cleanly because it's bright, highly reflective, constantly covered by clouds, always changing with the seasons, and often photographed under very different lighting conditions, then stitched together from multiple satellite passes, sensors, years, and resolutions. But this is where the mystery comes back to life. Even if the blur is caused by stitching and technical limits, it still feels strange, because it creates the impression that the continent is being edited in real time. You start hearing the same claims repeated over and over, that some satellites seem to avoid certain interior regions, Google Earth blacks out specific areas, and that people share exact coordinates like treasure maps, promising you'll see a pyramid, a doorway, a shadow that shouldn't exist, or a shape that looks too clean and geometric to be natural. And the deeper you chase these claims, the more obvious something else becomes. Antarctica is one of the only places on Earth where most people will never go, never verify anything for themselves, never touch the ground, feel the air, or talk to a professional who casually shrugs and says, "Yeah, that's just how it looks." There are no locals, only visitors, so the map becomes the focus, because it is the only access to Antarctica most people will ever have. And when that map looks even slightly wrong, imagination takes the wheel. That's why blurred imagery isn't just a small detail in these stories. It's what starts it all. This is where the conversation goes from maybe the map is just messy to something much bigger, because people start asking a different question. What if the wall isn't really a wall at all? One of the most viral Antarctica ideas right now isn't even flat Earth. It's the claim you see repeated across edits, screenshots, and diagrams that all say the same thing in different words. The ice wall was never meant to be a wall. It's an entrance, not a gate you pass through once, not a border that marks the end, but an entrance that leads somewhere else. And once you think of it that way, the whole idea changes. Because an entrance suggests a place you can reach, it suggests travel, and it suggests there's something on the other side that people don't want disturbed. That's why these edits almost always show the same visuals. Tunnels under ice, openings near the poles, passages leading into a hollow interior, or maps labeled with strange names like Agartha, inner continents, and hidden oceans under Earth's crust. At its core, it's the old hollow Earth story, just rebranded with Antarctic ice. The reason it gets people's attention is because it's based on real science that already sounds strange, like the fact that Earth has large spaces beneath the surface, including caves, lava tubes, subglacial channels, and large areas under ice that humans have never physically reached, even though none of that means there's a hidden inner world you could just fly into. Conspiracy content doesn't need the entire claim to be true, it only needs enough real-world facts nearby to make it feel believable. And Antarctica provides that in a few ways. First, there really are massive subglacial systems, rivers flowing under ice, lakes sealed beneath miles of frozen cover, and caves formed by geothermal heat and volcanic activity. Second, there are parts of Antarctica where the land under the ice isn't flat, because there are buried ridges, mountain ranges, deep basins, and uneven terrain that can look like a hidden landscape when it's mapped. Third, there's a basic human issue. People don't like the idea that everything has already been discovered. So when someone offers a new place on Earth and frames it as, they don't want you to know, curiosity kicks in fast. Now add one more image that shows up constantly in this content. The comparison chart showing the deepest hole humans have drilled into Earth. It usually points to the Kola super deep borehole and shows a depth of only a few miles next to a crust diagram that's tens of miles thick. And the point is simple. Even our deepest drilling is tiny compared to the planet. That part is true because humans have physically reached only a very small part of what's under us. The entrance theory takes that fact and turns it into a simple message. You don't really know what's down there, you can't easily prove what's down there, and compared to the size of Earth, we haven't gone that far. When you connect that idea to Antarctica, which is already remote and hard to access, it becomes something people fixate on, because it combines a clear boundary with unanswered questions. Does that make it true? Not necessarily, but it makes people keep watching, keep searching, and keep sharing. One of the most talked about mysteries in Antarctica is the so-called Antarctica Pyramid. The screenshots usually show a sharp triangular peak rising out of a sea of snow, often paired with a dramatic caption like, "They don't want you to see this," as if the image alone is supposed to prove something hidden. Sometimes there's even specific measurements added, which makes it sound less like a natural formation and more like a massive structure built on purpose. And to be fair, the shape does stand out, because our brains naturally look for patterns, and a pyramid shape immediately makes people think of something man-made. This is where scientists say Antarctica causes confusion. On a continent buried under ice, you don't see the full landscape, but mostly just whatever manages to stick out above the surface. You're often looking at mountaintops breaking through glaciers, and those exposed peaks are shaped by wind, ice pressure, and erosion over extremely long periods of time, which can create sharp edges and flat faces that look geometric from certain angles, especially when snow fills in cracks and smooths over rough details. These peaks even have a name, nunataks. A nunatak is a mountain peak or rocky ridge that rises above an ice sheet, and depending on lighting, shadows, and viewpoint, some of them can look unusually clean or symmetrical. In the right conditions, steep faces and sharp ridgelines can line up just right, creating a pyramid-like silhouette, especially when shadows and snow hide the irregular parts you would normally expect to see. And this kind of illusion isn't limited to Antarctica. There are mountains all over the world that look pyramid-shaped from the right angle, including famous ones like the Matterhorn, which impressed people long before modern geology explained how it formed. So the scientific answer is straightforward. A mountain that looks like a pyramid is still just a mountain. They explain these shapes as natural formations, but many people aren't satisfied with it. A pyramid-like form naturally makes people imagine something ancient under the ice, like ruins, lost structures, or evidence of a civilization that existed long before our timeline. That part is speculation, but Antarctica does have one real feature that keeps the rumor alive. Ice can preserve things for a very long time. If something had existed there long ago, the ice could hide it for an extremely long time, not because anyone is protecting it, but because nature covered it and left it buried. That's why when people see a pyramid-shaped nunatak, they start mentioning Atlantis or the builders, not because they have proof, but because Antarctica is one of the few places on Earth where asking, what if it's buried, doesn't sound impossible. And that possibility alone is enough to keep the pyramid story circulating, even if science offers such a simple explanation. The ice wall ring theory says Antarctica isn't a continent at the bottom of a globe, but a continuous ring of ice around the edge of the world, like the rim of a plate. The idea is that the South Pole isn't a single point, but a perimeter, the end line that holds the oceans in and keeps people from going farther. If you're wondering why anyone believes this, the answer is simple. Some map projections make it look that way. On certain flat maps that spread the world into a circle, Antarctica appears stretched along the outside edge, forming a border instead of a normal-looking continent. You'll also see this mentioned in the Quran. There's a story about a ruler called Dhul Qarnayn who travels to far ends of the known world and is asked to protect people from a destructive group known as Gog and Magog. According to the text, he builds a massive barrier, described as a wall or dam, made from strong materials so powerful it cannot be climbed over or broken through, effectively sealing them away. The Quran doesn't name a location, but it does describe it as a boundary at the outer reaches of human travel, a place people could not pass. The theory adds more claims, like the idea that flights avoid certain paths because normal routes would expose the real shape of the world. And then comes the main point that keeps people hooked. If Antarctica is a ring, then maybe there's more land beyond it, more oceans, and maybe even societies that we don't know about. This is where the ring idea blends into the entrance idea, because once Antarctica is treated like a boundary instead of a continent, people start asking what could exist past it. Even if you don't believe any of it, the theory survives because Antarctica is hard for most people to picture accurately. Most people live far away from it, most people will never see it, and most people experience it only through maps and videos. And when people can't see something for themselves, they rely on whatever visuals they're given, even if those visuals are misleading. If there are so many theories about Antarctica, a fair question always comes up. Why doesn't someone just go there and check? The answer is that it's not so simple. First, Antarctica is isolated on all sides by some of the coldest, roughest oceans on Earth, so just reaching the continent takes serious planning, money, and experience. And even if you do manage to get there, you can't just show up and roam freely, because this is where the treaty and the rules matter. In 1959, multiple nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, and the basic explanation is that Antarctica would be used for peaceful purposes and scientific research, military activity would be limited, and territorial claims would be put on hold instead of fought over. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, and it's often described as one of the longest-lasting and most successful international agreements, especially considering how many of those same countries fight over everything else. But to conspiracy-minded people, it sounds like the perfect cover story. Because how often do rival world powers agree to keep an entire continent out of normal ownership and control? How often does the world look at land that massive with known and possible resources beneath it and collectively say, we'll leave it alone? That's why people call it the Forbidden Treaty, because to them it doesn't feel like protection, it feels like a big do not enter sign written in legal language. Once someone thinks of it that way, every rule starts to look suspicious. If mining is discouraged or banned, people ask what resources are really down there. If military activity is officially restricted, people ask why ships, aircraft, and military-style planning still show up so often in Antarctic operations. If access is regulated, people ask why you can't explore freely like you can in other remote parts of the world. The reality is that Antarctica isn't illegal to visit, but it also isn't open in the way people imagine. Most regular people who go there do it through guided tourism, and they usually visit specific coastal areas during short seasons with strict rules about where they can land and what they can do. The inner part of the continent is different because it's brutally hard to reach. Rescue can be slow or impossible, conditions can kill you quickly if something goes wrong, and strict rules make casual exploration unrealistic. That creates suspicion because when people can't verify something themselves, they start questioning who decides what can be seen. That's why the Antarctic Treaty matters, not because it proves a hidden secret, but because it adds real restrictions to a place that already feels impossible to reach. And when you combine that with blurred satellite images, pyramid rumors, and entrance theories, the treaty starts feeling like part of the reason people think something is being kept out of reach. In the late 1940s, the United States launched a massive Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd, and the scale alone makes people raise their eyebrows. Thousands of personnel, ships, aircraft, and enough equipment made it look like a serious military operation, even though the official purpose focused on training, research, and learning how to operate in extreme cold. Some people claim the mission ended earlier than planned, that something went wrong, and that Byrd and his team ran into something unexpected, with stories suggesting it didn't stop because of weather or mechanical issues, but because of contact. This is where online quotes begin circulating, some linked to real interviews, others with no clear source at all. They claim Byrd warned about flying objects coming from the polar regions and spoke about threats that could approach from the poles faster than anyone was prepared for. Then the story goes even further, with claims that Byrd saw something impossible, a lush green land beyond the South Pole, a place larger than the United States, a hidden region not covered in ice, but alive. Many quotes linked to Byrd online are questioned or repeated so often, they start to sound official. Operation HIGHJUMP stays popular because it gives people a real name and a real historical event they can point to, instead of just a faceless internet theory. The timeline adds to the mystery. A huge expedition takes place, thousands of photos are taken, and strange statements start circulating. After that, Antarctica becomes more restricted, and later a treaty officially labels it as a place for peace and science. To people who already have doubts, this sequence makes it feel like something happened first, and the rules came afterward. And whether that idea is true or not, it still feels like big things happened down there, and the public only ever heard the official story. Now we step away from theories and into something we know that's real and still hard to believe at first. Antarctica has massive mountains hidden under the ice. Not small hills, but full-size mountain ranges buried under miles of frozen cover, confirmed by scientific mapping. One of the most famous examples is the Gomburtsev Mountains. Scientists know these mountains exist because they use tools like radar and seismic surveys to map the bedrock under the ice sheet. Mountains create valleys, valleys create basins, and basins can hold lakes, and if all of that stays buried under ice long enough, it becomes a place humans have never physically visited, even though it's right there beneath our feet. That's where the question, what else is down there, becomes reasonable. Not aliens or ancient cities, but unknown geology, hidden microenvironments, liquid water pockets, and strange formations that exist in places people can't easily reach. Antarctica can look smooth and empty from the surface, but under that ice the terrain is rough and uneven, and most of it is completely hidden under ice. If buried mountains show you what's under Antarctica, then the subglacial lakes show you what's moving under it. Because beneath miles of ice, there are large bodies of liquid water. Lake Vostok is the name most people hear first, because it's one of the largest known subglacial lakes, and it sits under an ice sheet so thick that it barely sounds real. The water stays liquid because pressure affects freezing, and geothermal heat from inside the earth adds just enough energy to keep some areas from turning solid. Even without any conspiracy, the idea is unsettling. A lake sealed under ice, isolated for huge spans of time, with the possibility of microbial life surviving in darkness, cut off from sunlight and the surface world. Then the internet turns it into something bigger. If a sealed lake is possible, then so is an underground ocean. If microbes can exist, then larger, unknown creatures could as well. Scientific drilling turns into, they're trying to get inside. And if you've already seen the clips of Hollow Earth, your brain naturally starts asking questions. What surprises people the most is that Antarctica wasn't always frozen. If you go back far enough in history, It wasn't an ice prison, it was a living environment, with forests, animals, and a much warmer climate, back when the continent sat in a different position and Earth's climate systems were different. That's why fossil finds in Antarctica are so interesting, because they feel like proof from a completely different planet. Bones, leaf impressions, and evidence of ancient creatures that don't match the modern image of penguins. But if Antarctica used to be warm, what changed? Over millions of years, the land moved, the oceans shifted, and the climate cooled enough for ice to take over. But Antarctica still holds a record of Earth's past, because ice traps air bubbles, dust, ash, and chemical traces that scientists can analyze to understand ancient climates. Some people connect this to old maps that seem to show Antarctica without ice, suggesting someone knew the coastline long before official discovery. If Antarctica was only ice, it would be easier to dismiss the strange stories people tell about it. But it isn't just made of ice, it also has active volcanoes. One of the most famous is Mount Erebus, an active volcano sitting in one of the coldest places on Earth, which already feels like something that shouldn't exist. Erebus has a permanent lava lake, constant gas plumes, and a long history of unusual activity, including reports of crystals being ejected and tiny flecks of gold found in nearby snow. Then there's Blood Falls, which looks like something straight out of a horror movie, a red waterfall spilling out of a glacier and staining the white ice like blood. The color comes from a lot of iron reacting with oxygen, and the liquid keeps flowing in freezing temperatures because the water is extremely salty, which stops it from freezing solid. Then there are the icebergs, which only add to the strange feeling, with striped, dark, and even green ice that looks layered or dyed instead of clean white. Scientists explain this with sediments, algae, and the way ice forms in layers over time, but to someone seeing it for the first time, it can feel like the environment is behaving differently than expected. That's why this matters in conspiracy theories, because sometimes unsettling things about Antarctica are real, fully documented, and still don't look real at all. Antarctica is a living ecosystem, and some of the life that survives there looks extreme compared to what most people are used to. In the Southern Ocean, there's a real phenomenon called polar gigantism, where certain cold water species grow much larger than their relatives in warmer seas, which helps explain why Antarctic sea spiders can grow unusually big, and strange creatures like sea pigs look even more alien in those waters. Because of this, the ocean around Antarctica can feel like a place where evolution followed a slightly different path. Then you add predators like leopard seals, which are aggressive and built for hunting, and it becomes clear why Antarctica doesn't feel welcoming even along the coastline. Zoom out even farther, and you reach the giants, because whales migrate to these waters to feed on massive swarms of krill, turning the Southern Ocean into a seasonal feeding ground for some of the largest animals that have ever lived. If you take all of this into account, the next question becomes hard to avoid. If this is what lives near the edges, what survives farther out and deeper down in the continent, closer to under-ice channels and hidden water systems? Even without secret bases or science fiction defenses, Antarctica is still one of the hardest places on Earth to access in real life, and that alone is enough to make people wonder who is really watching over it. Tourism does exist, but it's expensive, tightly controlled, and limited to specific coastal areas during short windows of the year, with strict rules about where visitors can land, how long they can stay, and what they're allowed to do. Most people never go beyond guided routes, and almost no one goes inland, which means the deeper parts of the continent remain unseen by the public. Then there are the research stations, which some people call colonies. Even though they aren't towns or cities in the traditional sense, these stations are permanent outposts, staffed year-round by rotating crews from different countries, and life inside them is planned carefully, with food, fuel, medical care, and social schedules managed like a long-term mission. Some stations are small and isolated, others are large and complex, with power systems, runways, labs, and living quarters built to survive months of darkness and extreme cold. Then there's McMurdo Station, the largest human presence on the continent, which has roads, buildings, heavy machinery, and everyday things like basic services and ATMs, creating the strange feeling of normal life planted in a place where normal life shouldn't exist at all. That contrast fuels the idea of guardians, not necessarily soldiers with weapons, but systems, rules, and organizations that quietly control who comes, who stays, and how far anyone is allowed to go. There are ships that monitor routes and aircraft that control airspace. There are permits, clearances, and layers of approval needed for almost every movement. Some people see this as safety and coordination, but others see it as enforcement, and because there are no locals to ask, no towns to wander into, and no casual way to explore freely, Antarctica never gets demystified the way other remote places eventually do. You can't just show up and blend in because you're always logged, scheduled, tracked, and dependent on support. Antarctica may not be guarded by soldiers lining every coastline, but it is guarded by distance, weather, cost, and the simple reality that one wrong decision can turn deadly. By the end of this, you're left with two realities at the same time. Ice shelves look like walls because ice breaks at the coast. Satellite maps blur because images are stitched together in harsh conditions. Pyramid-shaped peaks can be natural mountains. Underground lakes exist because pressure and heat keep water from freezing. Large expeditions look military because working in Antarctica requires massive planning and equipment. All of that makes sense. But Antarctica still feels different to people because most will never go there. They will never stand on that land, and they will never verify anything without relying on maps, footage, and secondhand stories. That's why the theories don't disappear. The ice wall ring, the entrance, the hidden world, the idea of more land beyond the cold. These stories spread because Antarctica is one of the few places left where people feel like there are still unanswered questions. And if you had the chance to go, not on a cruise, not on a guided route, but completely free to keep traveling until there was nowhere left to go, would you?